For the artists, for the passionate. Welcome to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the Adventures Elsewhere podcast. Or welcome if it's your first time. I am your host Jade Black and today I'm talking about building my bank of short stories and novelettes. This is something I really want to do for 2025 and beyond because I've seen a lot of really cool presses doing subcalls and a lot of them are longer at the minute, and I don't really have anything that suits that. So I'm trying to change that because I'd just like to get involved, and also I've talked before on the podcast a little while ago about the episode was called Backlog Transformation, about all these old projects I had and transforming them into shorter pieces, and I've also just had some new ideas come out of nowhere. So it's been a lot of reworking, some new ideas, and I just wanted to talk about that because I'm actually really excited for it, and it's something I'm going to be spending a lot of time doing in 2025 and beyond. I mean, if this episode goes up 2025, it's going to be a bit weird, but I'm recording in November 24th for what it's worth. So, if you are looking at the screen right now, you'll notice it's a little different to how I usually have the podcast board. It is mood boards instead of little sticky notes this time because a couple of days ago, I think it might have been like the day before the US election, so I'm not going to talk about that, but I was not having the best day, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to make some mood boards for funsies. I don't find these useful, per se, as a writer, but they're fun to do, and it allows me to flex my graphic design skills a bit, so that was just something I did to get through the day that day. So that's what I'm using today. The first one I'm going to be talking about is this one here. This is Charcoal Rain. This is slated to a publication. This has a publication date. This will be in Shadowspark's 2025 anthology. That will be coming, I believe, in June of 2025. So Charcoal Rain is a 1920s noir because I am obsessed with both of those things. So, and I've always wanted to have a go at it. This is something that I originally started drafting as a novel round about when I started Snakebite, ? It was a long time ago, and then it got put aside because Hanzo ate my brain big time. I mean, he still does, but not in quite the same way. Yeah, I put it down, and I was always a bit sad about putting it down, so I went back to it, and this was one of the main ones that sort of kicked off the whole backlog transformation for me, was making this into something that could actually be completed and, you know, find a home somewhere, because outside of what I do with the Determined Ones and the projects beyond that are in the same world, I don't have that much interest in writing full novel-length pieces. I just don't. I don't feel like I have the time as much as anything. That is genuinely a big factor. I just don't want to invest that much time in the headspace into these things anymore. Though I talk about that in more detail in that episode. So yeah, this is the first one of the bank. This is done. This is in need of a line edits pass. At the minute, all of the other edit passes have been done. That's the stage I'm at with it. And line edits on something that's, I think it's like 14.5k, thereabouts. It's either 14.5 or like almost exactly 14,000, but you know, that sort of length, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, line edits don't take very long, and the astute among you might notice that that's coming out like a month after Mr. Nakagami. And think, hang on a minute, why are you doing that to yourself? And that is a conversation that I've had with myself. But it's a 14k short. Doing edit passes on that does not take long at all. And I noticed this writing Count the Stars for the 24 Shadow Spark anthology. Yeah, that's out now for what it's worth. I realised how quick and easy it is not only to write something of that length, but to do edit passes on stuff like that. So Charcoal Rain, it's actually a dual POV story, which is very, very rare for me. I did that for like my first ever project and then just like never again. Because I didn't really enjoy it, but this story felt best told that way, and it was an easier way of keeping it shorter as well. So the two main characters are immigrants to New York. It's sort of semi-set in New York, sort of not. Well, one of them is a second generation immigrant, one of them is genuinely quite fairly new to America. And they're both older, they're in their sort of 40s, 50s, and they're working these jobs that they hate, and they're not having a good time. So they decide, it's sort of midlife crisis, I guess. They sort of decide to actually live, have some fun, and the sort of ramifications of the things they do and what happens, and that's the story. And it might be the most depressing thing I've ever written and ever will write, but it was an absolute blast writing it. I had a lot of fun. And yeah, it's really nice to have a noir sort of ticked off the list. Because another reason I wanted to do this was to, flex the writing muscles, challenge myself to do different things, just, learn and grow. Sort of CPD type stuff, much as anything else. So the one I'm actively working on at the moment is called Candidate 66. I don't know whether that title is going to stay or not. We'll see. I've talked about this project on the podcast before quite a few times, but it looks quite a bit different now because it is a novelette. This is probably going to be the longest of the novelettes, just as it stands, that's how it's looking. It's looking like it's going to be around 20k. I think I might have to cut it down for the sake of some of the stuff in the early parts I really don't love, and some of it's going to need some pretty heavy editing because I cut a lot of the more intricate stuff around the magic system and all of that out for the sake of shortening the overall length of the project, and also because I didn't care for it, I'm gonna be honest. So this is I guess, romantasy. It's fantasy, it has a strong element of romance. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the definition of romantasy is. It doesn't seem like it's very clear, and I'm not entirely sure how to define the subgenre of this piece, though it is definitely a fantasy piece. And in many ways, it's kind of classic fantasy as well. It's the MC is this farm boy, his name's Ling, and it's about him sort of going on this just quest to like improve his life. As much as anything, it's not like saving the world or anything like that, but it is about improving his life, and it plays on the sort of arranged marriage trope, sort of not, because that was just something I was sort of interested in trying as a trope. That's sort of what a lot of it is built around, was a couple of ideas around, is the magic good or bad? Is it a blessing or is it a curse? And also arranged marriage. I just sort of threw those things together, and this is sort of what came of it. And I'm gonna be honest, at the stage I'm at, I'm about halfway through drafting this. Probably a bit further than that. I don't know if I love it. I think a lot of it will be made in edits, because this project originally was starting to be drafted as a novel, and it was originally started to be drafted a really long time ago. And there's a lot that needs to be smoothed out and changed, partly because I've just changed bits of the concept quite a lot, actually, and added in characters and sort of taken out characters and shifted things around. The main thing I'm sort of concerned about with this one, and yes, this might get a little thorny as a debate, but there is a prologue, as it stands. And the prologue is from a different POV to the rest of the story, which is really the only reason it's there, is to sort of show the origin of the main character, and I think that would have worked quite nicely in a novel, ? I think there probably would have been better ways of showing that backstory in a longer form piece, so it probably would have ended up getting cut. But because this is now shorter form, I don't know whether to keep it or not, because it does show something that otherwise it's unlikely to be seen. It might not, probably not. But having a prologue in a short story, I personally find a bit odd. I don't care for really the greater, oh, but prologues are bad or epilogues are bad debate. I don't care about that. It's just that I personally think it's weird. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to work. And I was doing some analysis of these yesterday because, of course, I was. It's my thing, low-key. But I figured one of the other reasons why I just might not love this piece in the same way as other things I've written is because it's in third-person past. Because I've talked about this before on the podcast in the Writing Fantasy episode, that was a long time ago, that fantasy suits third person really well because of the inherent need for more description around magic and or creatures, or just fantasy elements often require a bit more description because there's not really a very solid grounding point, and third person is often the easiest way to do that. And I just don't like third past. I really don't like it as a tense POV. I don't. But I'd like to get good at it. I'd like to improve my skills on that and be able to write it in a way that I like. Part of the problem with Candidate 66, and this is very clear to see at the stage it's at the moment, is that the voice of the third party voicing does change a lot at various points as I'm sort of trying to experiment and find the right one for the story, because as someone who generally writes first person, tailoring the sort of voice and all those sorts of things, that's something I think a lot about. It's very important. So trying to nail that third person is something I'm having to do a lot of work on. And it's a really interesting exercise, but it's really, really hard. I'll give you that. I do wonder if I could convert this particular one to first person, because the magic element is increasingly small, but I don't want to do the conversion because it's a complete pain. I've had to do it before and I don't know whether it actually made the story better at that point, and them sort of backing out of the challenge, which I don't really want to do. So as for whether Candidate 66 ever makes it to a publication remains to be seen, but I am at least going to finish the first draft, and I'd like to try and edit it into some sort of shape that feels a bit more complete. But I don't know whether that editing portion of things is actually going to happen or not, so that remains to be seen. Alright, the next one I want to talk about is a project that has a sort of semi-working title, this one will probably stay, of hypoxemia. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but I don't care. So this is another fantasy. And this is actually the one that was featured in the Building a World in a Day episode. This is what this is. And this one is next on the list. I do actually have the opening drafted on this. I'm not particularly happy with it, but it is drafted. The first stages of things I'm generally not very happy with. That always requires the most edits because of voicing and all of that. But I really, really love this project. This is... I don't really know how to boil this down in any way succinctly, but if you're this far through the episode, I'm imagining you probably don't really mind about succinctness at this point. It's it's an interesting world-building challenge because it takes from... it has grounding points in places that I haven't really done before. There's a lot of African grounding points in there and just different places. There's some South America, there's Mongolia in there, there's all sorts of just things I haven't explored before in terms of world building, big time, in terms of story in the same way. It's the highest stakes story I think I've probably ever written, because it is a big heroic quest about, we come together as, people from these different tribes, so these tribal champions, we come together and we save the world. It's a big stakes on that ground. But the reason it's sort of short in that way is because things need to happen quickly, like really, really quickly, and I've concepted it to be short from the beginning. So in terms of subgenre, I guess this is probably technically epic fantasy. I'd be more inclined to call it sort of action fantasy myself. There's a whole thread that I really like about this sort of infernal song, and I really don't know how to talk about this without spoilers, but I really do like that, the sort of bringing music as a form of magic and all of that into fantasy I really like. And I know it's that people have done it before, but as a composer, it's just something that I love and I would love to see just more of in general. And it's something that's just fun to play with, music and fiction. It's hard to write, but I love it. And this is one that I'm really excited about. So Hypoxemia is a project I'm really excited about, and I will be looking to do something with that for sure. Alright, then we get into stuff that's a bit different. So these next three are all pretty new concepts. Some of them are actually pretty fresh off the press. One of them is a reinvention of an AU, for those that don't know, alternative universe, that I did not that long ago, probably, but I liked the concept, so I've sort of reinvented it into its own thing that I can actually properly take forward into something. And this is, as it stands, titled, and this will probably stay, The Night Theatre. And again, genre-wise, I'm not entirely sure how to define this, but the basic premise is that it's vampires running a sort of theatre and arts centre type place. That's the basics of it. It's an art centre theatre run by vampires. Because I always just wanted to write a vampire story one time. It doesn't really go any deeper than that. I just wanted to do it, see if I could, see if it was any good. And the actual premise of the story itself is that there's a journalist who is sort of trying to do an investigation into this theatre because it doesn't make sense that, the owner of this theatre has looked the same for a couple hundred years. And, there's a bit of basic deception about, oh no, I'm the son of, I'm the grandson of. But, yeah, there's something a little off about the whole thing from the outside. So it's about that sort of trying to, like, how it would actually sort of work in practice if you've got these immortal beings practicing the arts, and how does that work, and what happens when someone tries to say, hang on a minute, something's not right here. And I want to preface this by saying it's not very serious. This, like, it's not a proper serious investigative journalist thriller or anything like that. It's pretty light-hearted as it goes, and I haven't drafted any of this yet, but I do know that one of the things I really want to play with, just because I think it's funny, is garlic bread. Like, there's, instead of the classic garlic sort of, just like, has a really detrimental effect on vampires, it just sort of presents as like a garlic allergy. And there's garlic bread, and sort of, it's a bit like when you eat something you know you shouldn't because it tastes good and you just like it, and there's going to be that whole element with garlic bread, and it's just going to be, that's the point that gets probably the most ridiculous, and it's just going to be funny. Because I just wanted to do that. That's literally all it is. So yeah, this one started out as an AU with the determined ones that I did just for fun. I might have talked about this on the podcast before, I don't know, but it was originally digitally drafted and it was a mess because of that, basically, and pressing all the buttons and, oh, I could be clever with italicizing here, and it wasn't good. It was just pretentious in a bad way, as opposed to my usual pretentious. So this one is actually going to be, I am sticking to the route of multi-POV on this one, which again is very unusual for me. I don't do this. Like, this is straight multi-POV, it's not dual, it's not three, it's going to be quite a lot of POVs. It's almost sort of going to be intertwined flash fiction in that sort of way. That might be an easier way for me to think about drafting it, at least, actually. But that was how the original AU was written, and it was just a lot of fun, and for me, I got to see a lot of different sides of the theatre and the sort of different avenues and how different things are handled. And for a project like this, that is so much about, okay, but how does it work? I felt that that was the best way to showcase it, was showing, well, this is how this bit works, and this is how this bit works, and this is how your main journalist guy just gets really confused and what the fuck is the garlic bread about? And I'm really looking forward to writing this one because it is genuinely gonna be quite funny. I like writing banter, I like writing humour, but I've not written something that has a sort of permanent comedy thread to it, so that's going to be quite fun. Right, the next one I want to talk about is probably, now this is the newest project idea out of all of them. And this has a working title, this might stay, it probably won't, of Plunderer's Canyon. And this one, again, genre-wise, I don't know exactly how to define it. I'm sort of leaning towards adventure at the minute, but that doesn't really feel correct. It's a treasure hunter story. And the basic premise of this one is that you have this noble family, and the eldest son and the youngest son have wandered away from the family. They've gone off and done their own thing, and they've become treasure hunters because they don't like the idea of, running, a country or whatever it is that they're meant to be doing. Like, this is really early concept stage, none of this is drafted in any way, shape or form. But they sort of reject the whole idea of, well, you're our eldest child, so you must inherit this sort of governmental responsibility. And so the line on the mood board at the minute is, if the system relies on, effectively, chosen ones, then it's crap. It's a bad foundation for a system. And also, just us as personalities, we are not suited to this. We would be terrible leaders of a country or whatever it is, so we're not doing it because we wouldn't do a good job. And actually, you just need to find someone who's better suited for the task, and if that means that we have to effectively run away to prove our point, fuck you, we'll do that. Fuck you, let's find treasure and actually have a good time. And at points throughout the story, they're going to get these letters from their family saying, hey, look, like, the world is, like, low-key on fire, can you, like, come and help? Because they're so set in their ways and stubborn about, but you must. So it's, again, it's sort of light-hearted, but also not in the sense that it's just these two lads having fun, finding treasure, and getting into some scrapes while the world is, like, low-key burning in the background. And they're just like, yeah, we told you so. So it's sort of light-hearted, sort of not. And I think that one's going to be quite a lot of fun to write. I think it will be difficult, but it will be fun. Right, this next one, we're actually going back to fantasy. There's a surprising amount of fantasy that I have sort of lined up. I did do some analysis on that as well, of course, and it's 4 fantasy out of 10. So yeah, it's actually quite a lot. This is number 3 that I've talked about. And at the minute, it has a working title of Eye of Darkness. Probably will stay because I really don't know what other direction to go with it. And this is very much a sort of epic fantasy. And again, none of this is drafted. This is early concept stage still. I'm not entirely sure what I'm doing with this one. This is almost definitely going to be written in third past again, just to get the vibe and feel of epic fantasy, because that is what it is, so I might as well go full ham on that, see if I'm any good at it, make myself good at it, learn. But the basics of this is, the main character is a sort of special advisor to, I guess, the Queen. I'm not entirely sure if it's Queen or just magistrate, governor, whatever, but that's not really important at this stage. He's a special advisor, and he has been shipwrecked, and he's waiting to be rescued, and this second ship also gets wrecked in the same place. It's like some cursed ocean or something. I do have some note about that. And this ship is full of criminals. They're being transported. And there are very few survivors of the second shipwreck. And the one person that sort of makes it to the area with this special advisor is this very notorious criminal in another land. So when the rescue does eventually come, they take everybody, but this criminal is arrested as soon as she sets foot in the special advisor's homeland, because she's a criminal. And then there's this whole big negotiation about, well, I know how to kill, the Eye of Darkness. That's this big destructive force that's going to, destroy swathes of land or something along those lines. And it's about, okay, but do we trust this criminal? If she really believes she can help and she is this powerful person, combatant in her own right, do we try and do that? Do we try and stop this destruction? Or is she lying? What's going on? So it's sort of this epic fantasy, but it's also very political intrigue, machinations and all of that, because it's me. Of course it is. It's a very classic feel to this one in many ways, in terms of high stakes and, big lands and shipwrecks and all of these things. But I can't say I really know. I think writing something like Hypoxemia first that's a bit more classic fantasy, but in a way a bit more modern, I think will help me write this one quite a lot. And getting a better feel and everything out of Candidate 66, I think will also help with this one a lot. It's going to be a big challenge, but I like the political aspect of it, so I'm quite excited to write this one too. Alright, these next last four, are from very deep within my old backlog. These are all really old projects, with the exception of one that's probably from about the same time as Candidate 66, thinking about it, but it has been sat dormant in early concept for a very long time, and it hasn't really been touched. So let's talk about that one first. That has a title, and this will stay. There's the title I had from the beginning, and it's never leaving because I love it. It's called City of Tiny Lights. And this is a thriller. It might also touch vaguely on sort of gas lamp fantasy. I'm not entirely sure what gas lamp fantasy is, I am not gonna lie. But it's a thriller with some amount of thread of the supernatural, stroke paranormal. It might edge into fantasy, I don't know exactly. And this has a sort of historical... It has a historical setting that I like to do. You know, I usually stick in like pre-electricity type settings, and that's the case for most of the projects I've listed thus far. Charcoal Rain is 1920s, that's about as modern as I go. The Night Theatre might actually be straight up contemporary, or like slightly retro, maybe more like 1950s. But City of Tiny Lights is in a middle ground where it's sort of Victorian. So there's an amount of, you know, there are street lights and things like that, but there's no such thing as a landline phone. So sort of early Victorian, slightly before-ish. So it's quite a different setting from that point of view, and I like that, for starters. I liked a lot of it aesthetically is about the sort of lights and all of that, in a similar way to a noir. There's a lot of aesthetic going into it, and I liked doing that for Charcoal Rain. I really enjoyed that, so I'm looking forward to doing that again. And the basic premise of this one is... this one's quite unclear as a premise, because, again, originally this was concepted as a novel, so there's sort of a lot of moving pieces as it stands. I haven't properly reinvented the concept for this one yet, so a lot of that is going to get shafted or shifted or moved around in some way. And the main character is this sort of ex-criminal, but he's the only one that knows that. And in backstory, he happened across this woman with her young son. And this boy has the ability to see spirits, see the dead, that sort of thing. And that is an ability that is very coveted by a lot of different people, all of whom are nefarious in various different ways, be that government or gangs or anybody else. So he wants to protect this child. But she, the mother, has a different view of how to protect him, and a largely ineffective way of protecting him. And there are a lot of disagreements between these two characters, and where the story takes place is sort of a significant amount of time after that. So the boy is now 16, 18, 20, something like that, so a young adult age. And the main character is like mid-40s, maybe a bit older. And times have gotten worse. There's a lot more open violence, a lot more open crime, you know, it's rough out there. And through one way or another, this boy has evaded capture for that amount of time, but there have been close scrapes and calls, and he's become notorious. People know about him, people want to find him. And it's about continuing to protect him in ways without getting dragged too deep into the past and unfinished business, and also trying to fulfill this other job that the main character has been hired to do with these characters who are from elsewhere. And they don't know who this boy is or what his significance is or anything, and trying to keep all that from them. And I think, again, this is going to be a really difficult one to write. There's going to be a lot to keep track of, but I think it will be a lot of fun. Talking of projects, there are a lot of fun. One of the projects I am bringing back is my first ever project. And this is called Bloodsport. I have talked about this on the podcast before. This is a slasher, and I wrote this when I was like 16 or something. So that gives you an idea of how long ago this one is from. Yeah, a while. But I always had so much fun writing this, and I knew even at the time that I was ruining it in edits, and it made me really sad to sort of, I knew the first draft wasn't good, but to see it honestly get worse in edits, I've never felt satisfied with where I left it. It's been something that has eaten at my brain ever since at various points. And one of the main problems I ran into in edits was trying to make it novel length, because it never originally was. The first draft was like 35k, and it was a bloated draft. So making it into a proper novelette that's probably 15, if even that just seems like the overtly sensible thing to do, is to just redo it in a form that it's actually just much better suited to, and with better skills and everything that I need to actually pull this off properly. So the basic premise of this, I don't know if this is something I've ever really talked about, is that it's from the serial killer's point of view. Because I always thought that was interesting, that was almost the USP of it, was that actually the whole thing is single POV from the serial killer, and what she's trying to do and how she justifies what she's doing, and the ends justify the means and all of this. And the part that was never clear in the original draft, and I don't know how I'm going to handle this, is whether she was fighting against sort of gang control of the city or government control or both. So that's something that I'm going to reinvent and clarify, and there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done on the original concept because it was so unclear and trying to be so many things. And so a lot of work needs to be done on that. But the main character is going to remain largely unchanged because she was the best bit of the book by a long, long, long shot. And the setting as well needs some clarification, because that was one that at one point seemed sort of, again, 1950s retro, but at other points seemed genuinely futuristic, and that needs clarification. I'm gonna end up sticking with something closer to 1950s, just because I think all of the foundations of the premise and the plot and everything else with it makes more sense back then. But the other main change I'm making to this is I am actually making it single POV. It was originally dual POV from the serial killer and the person who ended up being her sidekick. That whole character being a POV character and really being a character is being cut, because I don't like it. I don't like the direction that took the story in. It didn't feel at all necessary or anything, and what I'm doing to pay tribute to that is this is going to be a novelette with chapters. Not all of them will be. I'm not really sure where I stand for many of those. But this one will. And in the chapters there will be little epigraphs from effectively the sort of second character, or maybe newspapers, but there are going to be epigraphs sort of from outside that in some way show how the city feels about this killer and how different people feel about it, the whole situation, because I think it's a bit of a shame for that whole arc to be lost, that whole perspective on the story to be lost entirely, but also it's just a nice little tribute to what this project once was, even though it's going to be reinvented pretty hardcore to actually make it make sense, genuinely, as much as anything else. The original draft just had so many things to it that were tied in, and the main quest of the story at no point was actually properly clear, but it was fun to write, so I'm really looking forward to going back to this one. So another one of the really old projects, and this was number 3 that I ever thought of, because number 2 is not good enough to reconsider, I'm not gonna lie. But the third one has been renamed, and this title will probably stay because, again, I don't know what else to call it. Elysium's Restoration. And this was a project that when I was originally trying to draft it, I scrapped the draft and started over twice. So that gives you an idea of A, how tricky this was to write, and B, how little idea I had of how to handle it, which is why it ended up being shelved. And this is a fantasy project that has roots in a lot of mythology, particularly Greek myth, but I'm probably going to switch that because I'm bored of Greek myth, and I'm sure that at this point everybody else is as well. The main character, I don't know whether she's properly alive or not, that was never clear. Perhaps by design, I don't know what 17-year-old Jade was thinking, really. The idea was that this effectively heavenly realm had become corrupted, and that there was this, I guess, chosen one who was to get rid of the people in heaven who were not deserving of being there, and to restore it all to its former glory. And the sort of social commentary on that one is that actually no one deserves to be in heaven, because there are all of these sorts of virtues and morality, and as morality progresses through time, does anyone really deserve to be in a place like that? And certainly not from history, because moral standards were different, and that's sort of that whole premise. So it ends up becoming this sort of empty realm. And it's a very action-heavy fantasy, which is going to be a complete pain in the arse to write. But she effectively has these divine powers that are lent to her by... At one point in the concept and draft of this, she had to travel across parts of Greece to get some of these powers and then die and then go to heaven and find more of them, or vice versa and do it the other way around. But that whole arc has just been cut because I did not write any of that well, and if it's a novelette, it really doesn't matter, she just has divine power, deal with it. So this is a project I'm nervous to do. I tried it not twice, but 3 times before it got shelved. I was never originally very happy with the concept. I never loved what it turned into. It felt too similar to a different project I was also doing at the same time, because I would draft genuinely like 4 or 5 projects at the same time. It all ended up sort of blurring together, which is which was a real problem back then. But I think reinventing this as a novelette has the potential to be quite interesting. I think I'm probably most interested in the social commentary, so again, political side of it. Also first-person fantasy, for sure, on this one. Because I think at some point that's neat to try. That's sort of a different skill set to doing the third-person classic fantasy. It's definitely not a sort of classic fantasy, so doing something different, just flexing writer muscles, it's all good. Okay, last, and certainly not least, we have, this title is certain to change, Phantom Labyrinth. And this one has been mentioned on the podcast before under the guise of Laura, because that was my main character's name. This one is now have been reinvented, partially, as a paranormal mystery. This was originally, again, concepted at novel length, but I think I knew at the time, and definitely know now, the whole premise was definitely better suited to novelette length. There was nowhere near enough of the story to make it a novel. So this is a young woman who comes to end up in this labyrinth, and it's sort of loosely, ever looser, based on the Edinburgh Vaults, which you can go and see, by the way, and I did do this and I recommend. And she is sort of, there's some time shenanigans going on, where she is trying to, the main premise is she's trying to find her way out of this labyrinth, and she's doing this with a companion, and that companion is a ghost, and the ghost is her previous incarnation, and they're both occupying the same space at the same time, but they're seeing different things about this labyrinth. This woman in the semi-contemporary setting, again it probably ends up being like 1950s or Victorian, maybe earlier, I don't know. She's seeing this whole labyrinth, this whole underground area in ruins, whereas her previous incarnation is seeing it as it's not quite brand new, but, you know, there are lights on, there are other people walking around, there's all sorts going on, this place is full of life and full of people. So trying to navigate that, and there's also this sort of question mark about, is my previous reincarnation a criminal? Is she wanted for something? What's she done? There are people trying to kill her previous incarnation, but also her, because they see the two of them together. So she's trying to fight people she literally can't see because they're not there in her time, but she can also interact with them, and it's very strange. I'm not really sure exactly where the nature of all that time shenanigans came from, or how any of that's going to work, but one of the things I have slated for this is a big escape sequence towards the end where there's a lot of destruction, and I think it'll be, again, really difficult, but really interesting and really fun. So yeah, I've got a lot of projects lined up that are shorter, and I really like having all of this done. A lot of this has been eating at my brain for a long time, in terms of particularly the older projects, feeling like I was never quite done with them because they were never really what I wanted them to be, and I still felt like the concepts of a few of them were really solid, and I stand by that. Some of the premises I'm still interested in and want to do things with. So it's nice to have figured out a way of tackling them that doesn't take tons of time and headspace invested, and it gives me a way of doing short stories, which I've really missed since the Determined Ones has become such a monolith, and just flexing writer muscles, doing something different. When I interviewed Willie Handler on the podcast, one of the things he talked about as a multi-genre writer was doing multi-genre so that you don't get stuck in a rut. and so you don't just end up falling into the same patterns and it becomes monotonous. And I'm not saying that Determined Ones has become that for me at all, far from it. I find it fresh and new and exciting every single time, because every book is different. It's a different sort of subgenre, even though there are two political thrillers. It's two very different takes on a political thriller and different takes on voicings, and there are always new characters to meet and new things to see. So it is always fresh and new, but the idea of doing something that is just so completely different, sometimes that's not thriller, sometimes that is, that just tackles different things that I'm also interested in, that there's just not always room for in the Determined Ones and that extended universe, I guess. That's just something I've been craving as a creative, is just doing something a bit different, and part of me was a bit sad that for a time I didn't really feel like I could write, a vampire this or a fantasy that. Now it's like, well, just why not? Even if, in the end, it doesn't go anywhere. And there are some projects I'm not necessarily expecting to finish or to publish ever. I mean, if there was one that I would say I wouldn't necessarily finish or publish, I would say that's either Elysium's Restoration or Plunderer's Canyon. I'm not convinced either of those will be finished or published. And there are some I'm looking forward to more than others. So The Night Theatre I'm really excited about, Hypoxemia I'm really excited about, City of Tiny Lights and Bloodsport as well. Others I don't care for as much, so Elysium's Restoration, Eye of Darkness, but you just never know what will come of these things, and if it gives me a way of submitting to subcalls, because that's something in ways I feel like I should be doing and I wish I was doing more of, and maybe getting some publications out of it, just getting a broader portfolio, just doing more as a creative. That's all good. That's something I've just wanted, just do more creative stuff is something I want. Be that in art, in writing, just I have a lot of things I'm interested in, just a lot of premises, a lot of things interest me as a creative, and it's a shame if I don't pursue them, I think. I think that's what it boils down to more than anything. I'm interested in writing vampires just because. I'm interested in writing fantasy with completely different world building to anything I've written or read before. I'm interested in writing a classic fantasy just to see if I can. I'm interested in writing about weird time shenanigans because, again, I've not read or seen anything like it, and I think it would be fun. Different types of family dynamics, different types of politics, and just going back to some things that were really fun. It doesn't all have to be serious. It doesn't all have to go anywhere. It's just something that helps. And in my How to Write Faster episode, I did talk about I find it helpful to have a side project. Not in the way I used to, but having a small project on the side so I can do every other day, a sort of alternate project. And, sometimes that other day is a day where I don't do things. That happens a fair amount of the time, but having something else, it helps. So having a whole slew of stuff lined up is also helpful, because it's like, okay, well, candidate 66 at some point will be finished. Okay, well, just pick from the list which one's next. Hypoxemia's going to be next after that. Almost definitely The Night Theatre, or maybe The Night Theatre will come first because I'm just that hyped for it. Because it's fun and it's also a bit shorter, probably. So having that all lined up and ready to go, I'm getting a lot out of that. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled for anything about this. This is something I want to talk more about on social media, is talk about these other projects, sort of not fully openly, but a little bit on the down low, maybe answer some writing cues about them or just talk about them a little bit. Keep your eyes peeled for any updates. on these, because, I mean, Charcoal Rain will be published, and I'm looking at publishing others. In Shadowspark, we do have other anthology themes that are up in the air, half confirmed, half not, and I am looking ahead to that, if not other subcalls. So Stanchion Zine on Twitter is one I've been looking at subbing to. So you never know when these projects are coming, because I don't. So the best way to stay updated is to check out my socials. The place I'm most active, definitely in terms of writing, is Twitter. That is JadeBlack21. In case of things like art, if you want to see more stuff about art and world building, and, you know, more just pretty things, if you've enjoyed looking at these mood boards, that's going to be then Pinterest is going to be a place for you. I'm Jade_Black21 on there. That's probably the place where I'm second most active, or looking to be. Other places I exist, I am on Instagram occasionally. That's somewhat become the podcast home, but also not, because I try not to dedicate as much time to Instagram anymore, because no matter what I do, I don't really seem to get anything out of it, and having done some analysis, it's just not where my audience is. But on Instagram, I'm Jade_Black21. You'll get all the important updates on there, so release dates on anything I'm doing. You'll also get advance notice of what the episode of the week is as well. If you've been enjoying the podcast, then make sure you check that out. And so Instagram is Jade_Black21. I'm also on Blue Sky. I'm not on there very much. Again, like Instagram, it doesn't really seem to be where my audience is, but I am on there for, you know, key updates. And, you know, I pop in and engage a bit. Sometimes I just sometimes pop into these places a bit randomly. I'm JadeBlack21 on there. So wherever you are, whatever you're doing, I will be around, and I will be contactable if you just want to message me on any of those platforms. Like, I will almost definitely respond if it shows up. My Twitter DMs are a bit wonky, so Instagram seems to be the most reliable for that. I will see it and respond. There is also interviews. I talked about interviewing Willie Handler earlier in this episode, and I'm always looking to do more interviews. That's something I really, really want to do more of in 2025, because this is a time where we need art more than ever. So if you are published or well on the way, please, please get in touch. My email is on screen. It's jade42black@gmail.com. You know, there are no restrictions on length or genre or age category or anything like that. Whether you've got novelettes, whether you've got novels, whether you've got a trilogy you want to just do an overview on, or poetry, whatever you've got, bring it in. Let's see what we can do. Indie and self-pub, you are the people I want to hear from the most. But please get in touch. I would love to be a part of it. I really, really would. But until next time, you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a like. It helps the channel a lot. Intro and outro music by me. Copyright J Black 2024.